At dinner, when I mentioned that I had left my previous job due to health reasons, my sister-in-law said mockingly, "So you're unemployed again? How does it feel to be a failure?" I just smiled and said, "How does it feel to find out that you won't be living with me for free anymore?" Her face turned pale. Before we continue, please write down which country you are watching this video from and how old you are. Enjoy listening. Zana's fork clinked against the rim of the glass so loudly that even the candles on the table seemed to flinch, and as always when she wanted attention, she stretched her neck and smiled her impeccable, cold smile. "Everyone, come here, there's going to be a show. Friends," she said in a sweet voice, "let's drink to my mother-in-law Galina, who is out of work again. Well, due to her health, of course." And she made air quotes with her long nails, glistening in the candlelight. What is it like to be such a complete failure at this age? It became so quiet at the table that you could hear the spoons tapping against the dessert bowls. The faces of my son Mikhail's colleagues and their wives suddenly fell. Everyone pretended they hadn't heard anything, as if it wasn't me, a 64-year-old woman who had buried her husband 2 years ago, who had just been thrown in the face of this failure. If you are listening to me now, subscribe and write where you are from, it's useful to know. Where else do people encounter such rudeness? I placed my glass on the table carefully, without trembling. My hand had learned to hold steady over the course of my life, and I spoke in a calm voice, the kind you use in the morning when talking to your first hot cup of coffee. I imagine, Zana, that this feeling is similar to finding out that tomorrow you will be evicted from the house you have been living in for 3 years. I paused briefly to let it sink in. You and Mikhail have exactly 30 days to find another place to live. Zana turned pale so suddenly, it was as if the rug had been pulled out from under her feet. "What are you talking about?" she hissed. "About the fact that this house is mine," I replied in the same even tone. The same one that you are so diligently remodeling to suit yourself and that you refer to as ours on social media. Documents are stubborn things and, incidentally, public. Anyone can obtain a copy and see whose name is on the deed. Misha dropped his fork, and it clattered loudly against his plate. "Mom?" He looked at me confused, like a boy who had forgotten his poem at a morning performance. "Son," I nodded gently, "your wife apparently didn't tell you one important detail. The house is registered in my name. There is not a single letter about you or her in the title deed. There never has been." I got up from the table, smoothed my dark blue dress, I like everything to fit me perfectly, and, looking straight at Zana, said without a smile, "You were especially apologetic today. So I'll make this crystal clear. You have exactly 30 days to pack your things and find a place to live that you can afford. I advise you to look at options that are affordable on a part-time yoga instructor's salary." Jean's mouth opened and closed like a fish thrown ashore, while my guests suddenly became engrossed in the pastries. It was obvious how difficult it was for them to hide their relief. Zana was not well liked here. She had a talent for repelling people. "You can't just kick us out like that," she finally blurted out. "I can," I said calmly. "It's called being the mistress of your own house. The law is on my side, read it if you want." I picked up my purse, threw a shawl over my shoulders, and thanked my guests for the evening. "Mikhail," I said at the door, "we'll talk tomorrow when things calm down." "Zana, if I were you, I would have already opened the announcement. It's the end of the year, a bad time for filming. If you miss it, you'll be left with nothing." And I left my own dining room, leaving behind a woman who had just learned that karma, like good wine, is served at the right temperature and at the right moment. The night was quiet, the winter air smelled of frost and pine needles. And I knew that in the morning the phone would ring at exactly the time when people's nerves were frayed. In the morning, I woke up before the alarm clock, as often happens when you think a lot at night, put the kettle on, opened the curtains in the winter garden, and sat down with the newspaper. I didn't have to wait long. At 7:15, the phone rang. Just as people's nerves give way. "Mom, what happened yesterday?" Mish's voice was tense and tired. I could just picture him pacing back and forth in the kitchen, rubbing his forehead with his palm, like a little boy who knew he had done something wrong. "Watch your language, Mikhail," I said calmly. "And I think you understand very well what happened. Your wife decided to humiliate me in front of guests." I reminded her of the boundaries. "You can't kick us out of our house. It's not your house, son." I put the cup on the saucer so it wouldn't clink. And it never was. He fell silent. He's breathing into the phone, gathering his questions. "Explain. Remember 3 years ago, how you were looking for options? That fabulous little house on Berezovaya Street? The bank wouldn't give you a mortgage, debts, small down payment, unstable income. You were already rolling your lips and there was rejection after rejection. I said I'd figure it out. So, I didn't help with the loan, Misha. I bought this house outright, without a penny and without a mortgage. With cash. Money from my father's insurance payout after his death." There was silence on the other end, only the occasional aha, as if the connection was bad. "What about the payments?" He finally squeezed out. "All these years we've been paying the mortgage." "You paid me according to the lease agreement," I said just as calmly. "Every month. For 3 years. Not to the bank, but to me as the landlord. The house is registered in my name, in Yogurn, only me. It was my investment and my insurance for old age. And yes, I deliberately didn't tell you. I wanted you to stand on your own 2 feet, to have pride, not the kind that comes from being given everything, but the kind that comes from doing things yourself. Why didn't you tell us?" There was no anger in his voice, only confusion, the kind of confusion that comes with adulthood. Honest confusion. My son isn't angry, he's gentle, it's different. Gentleness can be forgiven, cruelty cannot. "Because self-respect will come to me in due course," I replied quietly. "Your father and I always helped in such a way as not to cripple a person with a sense of duty. But, Misha, no one will bring you respect and independence. They cannot be given or bought." "Jean says you are seeking revenge," he said cautiously. "Jean says a lot of things." I allowed myself a dry smile. "Especially about her studio, which keeps getting started and started. But now is not the time to talk about her. We're talking about simple things, about how you can't call a 64-year-old widow a failure at my table and expect everyone to let it slide." He was silent for a long time, as if he were sitting on the edge of his chair and looking out the window, not seeing what was behind him. "What should we do?" he asked, already more quietly, almost boyishly. "Look for a place to live. Apply for a loan, earn the down payment, negotiate." I listed as if reading from a list. "Build your life without my safety net, which you can kick around. What if we don't find anything in 30 days? You'll figure it out," I sighed, but firmly. "You're 35, Mikhail. It's time to take responsibility for adult decisions like an adult." "I love her, Mom," I can barely hear myself say. "I know," I said, and didn't add anything about love that only loves itself. "But love is not an indulgence for rudeness and lies." We were silent for a while, each lost in our own thoughts. I heard him flip a switch, which meant he sat down and stopped pacing. "Okay," he finally said. "I'll start looking at options. We'll talk." "Talk," I agreed. "And Mikhail, you have 30 days. These aren't threats. These are boundaries." We said goodbye without any loud words. I put the phone on the table, poured boiling water into the kettle, and checked that all the copies were in the envelope, the bank statement, the employment contract, the receipt. It was a habit I had developed over years of work, keeping everything in order so that I could find it when I needed it, and people would stop arguing. The day passed smoothly and quietly. I repotted a couple of violets, reread the city section of the newspaper, and called Elena, my neighbor, about exchanging keys in case I left. By lunchtime, the sky had clouded over, and small, sharp snowflakes began to fall, and the janitors were clattering with their shovels. And in this domestic noise, I suddenly felt very calm. When you call things by their proper names, the dust settles inside. Closer to 2 o'clock, my phone flashed with a new message, trivial, advertising. I turned off the sound, and yet a vein in my temple twitched. I know this routine all too well. First a call from my son, and then the one who started the whole dance comes to make peace. I gathered my hair into a bun, placed a clean cup next to the teapot, and thought, looking at the hands of the wall clock, it seems they are rushing to us with flowers. But that, perhaps, is another scene. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the doorbell rang as if someone had pushed their elbow against it. And then it was thrown open without waiting for me to put on my shoes. Zana, dressed in a tracksuit, with a bouquet from the nearest supermarket, the cellophane rustling louder than her hello. She had come to make peace. I've seen this act more than once in my life. Galina, we need to talk, she said, walking into the hallway as if it were her own home. She put the flowers on the table and turned with a look of remorse and determination on her face. I overreacted yesterday. Nerves. The studio is hanging by a thread. The holidays are coming up. Yes, your studio, which is about to open for the second year, I nodded, closing the door behind her. Come into the kitchen, the kettle is boiling. We sat down. I opened the paper bag, took out the vase, and placed it nearby, taking my time so that she would feel uncomfortable. I was wrong, Zana sighed. It's just hard. It happens, I agreed. How much money have you and Mikhail already poured into it? Approximately. She fidgeted in her chair. Well, equipment, advertising, rent, insurance. Thousands, maybe 800. Well, about 1 million. I'm not an accountant. Misha is better with the details. Interesting math for a studio with no clients, I said evenly. Zana, do you really think you can tell me fairy tales about no income when you've been posting stories every other day for the past month, showing rugs in mansions? Panoramic windows, private lessons at home, geotags in the most expensive neighborhoods. She jerked her chin. They're friends. They help me practice. Friends who pay cash. Off the books. I took out the cups, poured the tea, wondering how this domestic gesture always calms me down. Do you know what I did before retirement? I worked for 32 years as a financial expert in the system you dislike so much. And it was precisely with gray schemes and friends on cash that I dealt with every single day. The color drained from her face like water. You can't prove anything, she tried to hold on. The phone tracks geolocation, the car. The same thing, customers themselves postmarks and thank you by name. I smiled slightly. And, by the way, I have a habit of saving what others thoughtlessly throw on the internet. She fell silent, wrapping her hands around the mug, not drinking. And looking over my shoulder as if the window would give her a clue. What do you want? She finally asked, deflated. For you to understand that I'm not a doormat. Not a wallet or a doormat, I said quietly, so that every word would land where it should. If you talk to me like you did yesterday again, you won't just be kicked out of my house. I'll report everything I have to the tax office, with explanations and dates. And there you'll explain why there are no clients, but lessons at $5,000 an hour are scheduled for 6 to 8 a week. You wouldn't dare, she whispered. Check it out, I replied. But better not push it. We sat for another minute. I handed her the vase. Put the flowers yourself. Although you can take them back, I don't keep anything extra in my kitchen. She stood up abruptly. Mikhail is still on my side. You tell him that. I shrugged. And tell him how much your friends bring in per month. He's a grown man, he understands numbers. Zana stepped toward the door, but turned around, apparently wanting to add something sharp, but couldn't think of anything, and left. Her sneaker catching on the rug. The door clicked shut, and the house became quiet again. I could hear the clock ticking and the faint gurgling of the kettle. I put the vase back in the cupboard, sat down by the window, and looked out at the garden. Snow fluttered thinly in the air, settling on the apple tree like gray hair on a temple. I knew that such conversations never end in the kitchen. They continue where people are most vulnerable, in the evening, in the living room, when those who thought yesterday that everything was under control return home. And the clock was just about to strike that hour. In the evening, Mikhail came home alone, tired, with a crumpled shirt, sat down in the chair where his father used to sit, and for a while just sat silently, staring at the carpet, as if he could find a ready answer there. Zana said that you are threatening to report her to the tax office because of a couple of yoga classes. He finally exhaled, as if apologizing for someone else's words. Not because of a couple of classes, I replied calmly, pouring him some tea. When they charge $5,000 an hour, teach 6 to 8 personal lessons a week, and prefer cash. It's not a hobby. It's income. And not a small one. He raised his head sharply. How much? 5,000. I didn't soften it. She makes 120,000 a month. At least $1.5 million a year. And all her friends are marked with geolocation, with thanks and photos in the interiors that you yourself have seen. Mikhail lowered his gaze and nodded slowly, like a man who had put together a puzzle, but the picture was not a happy one. She said she was barely making ends meet, that the studio wasn't pulling its weight. On paper, her studio wasn't pulling its weight. And what really happens goes unaccounted for. And past you, by the way. He sighed and rubbed his nose. We have separate accounts. She said it was better for business. More convenient, for secrecy, I corrected quietly. Son, I'm not talking about money right now, although that too. I'm talking about the fact that lying is not a mistake, but a habit. And you've been living for 3 years with a person for whom it's a tool. He paused, picked up his cup, but didn't take a sip. What should I do? Make a choice. An independent one. I spoke softly, but without beating around the bush. I love you and will always be there for you, but I won't be a doormat for other people's sneakers. You have 26 days. This isn't hysterics or blackmail, it's boundaries. During this time, look for a place to live, apply for a loan, calculate your budget. If you decide to repair your relationship, do it in your own home, with your own money and hers, with transparent accounting and no fairy tales. He nodded. And in that nod there was more maturity than in all his attempts to be a patient husband. She wants to try first, he said hoarsely. Then let them try with the truth first, I replied. And with a declaration. We sat a little longer while the neighbors' windows went dark outside and the snow tapped softly on the windowsill. I got up, stroked his hair like I did when he was a child and a thunderstorm was raging right above the house, and stepped back toward the door. 26 days, Misha. I'm serious. I understand, he said. He got up, kissed me on the cheek, and left slowly, like a man walking alone for the first time in a long time. The night was unusually quiet, the house breathed evenly. I was almost asleep when a new message flashed on my phone screen. I'll be at your place tomorrow at 10 o'clock sharp. We need to discuss the paperwork. R.K. I smiled without joy. A neat business tone, 3 dots at the end. This is about those who come not to talk, but to pressure. It looked like the morning promised to be interesting. At exactly 10 o'clock, the doorbell rang as busily as people who are used to controlling other people's time ring. On the threshold was Raisa Kovalova, impeccable suit. Patent leather bag, the kind of look that usually assesses employees for a reprimand. Galina, let's discuss the paperwork, she said without saying hello, looking into the house as if checking the frequency of the floor. Come in, I replied calmly. Coffee? Tea? Don't get distracted, she snapped, walking into the living room. This is serious. Zana and Mikhail have been living here for 3 years, running the household, keeping things in order, investing their energy and time. This is their home just as much as it is yours. You can't just take a family and throw them out onto the street. I put the folder on the table and carefully opened it, old habits helping me more than valerian. No one is throwing the family out on the street, I said quietly. I am terminating the employment contract. And that is precisely why I am giving 1 month's notice. What employment? They are a family. Her eyebrows shot up like a barrier. Zana invested in renovations, furniture, and maintenance of the property. That is equity, to put it simply, a labor contribution. They have rights. Let's not use anglicisms, I smiled slightly. I paid for the repairs and furniture. Receipts, invoices, transfers, all in my name. The plot is mine, the house is mine, the yogurt is mine. Your contribution is what any tenant is in a rented home. Watered the lawn, dusted, took out the trash. Are you manipulating me now? Raisa snorted. Zana carried the burden of everyday life. She coordinated the workers and kept track of the bills. She coordinated the bills from my wallet. I moved the printouts closer to her. Here are the utility payments, debited from my card. Here are the transfers for materials, mine. Here is the contract with the electrician, I am the customer. And here, I pulled out a thin stack of checks, monthly payments from your son-in-law, Mikhail Lazarev, rent. 3 years, 12 a year. Everything has been done. Raisa lingered on the word rent, then pushed the papers away. Like a hot plate, the documents are not everything. There is a moral. They furnished the house, made it cozy. Zana didn't just live here, she put her soul into it. Those who respect a house put their soul into it, I said without emphasis. Yesterday, your daughter, a grown woman, called me a failure at my table, in my house, in front of my guests. And this after 3 years of free repairs at my expense and a life that many can only dream of. She sat up straight abruptly. Don't get personal. Zana is stressed. The studio is on hold. Zana's studio has been on hold for 2 years, I confirmed gently. But for some reason, private lessons are going well and, for some reason, are paid in cash. Friends, geotags, thanks, everything is out in the open. Are you sure you want to discuss contributions? Because I have something to show not only you. Raisa lost her tone for a second, her gaze became sharp as a shard. You are threatening my daughter with the tax office. I am setting boundaries. I replied. With me? Respectfully. With my house? Legally. With taxes? Honestly. It's very simple. She picked up her bag, tapped the lock with her fingernail, and regained her mask of business confidence. We'll come back to this conversation. You're not the final authority. Of course, I nodded. Come back, but with numbers, not generalities. In the meantime, I am officially notifying you that Zana and Mikhail have 26 days left from yesterday evening. Today is -1. You will regret it. She said goodbye. Usually, those who read documents too late regret it, I said, seeing her to the door. Tell Zana that it's better to look at the ad today rather than on Monday. It's the end of the year and the market is tough. The door closed, and the house was mine again, with warm air from the kitchen, the faint smell of coffee, and the ticking of the clock. I put the folder in a drawer, put the kettle on, but my hand fell on the top sheet, the contract, the statement, the receipts, and I realized it was just a trial run. When a mother fails to scare someone, someone who is used to scaring people professionally usually comes along. And, as luck would have it, my phone gently flashed with a new message. Tomorrow at 10 o'clock sharp, I will come with a colleague. We will discuss the legal aspects. RK. The same initials, but this time, it seems, it will be a different RK. On Tuesday afternoon, Elena stopped by. We made tea and discussed the news. And then the phone vibrated on the table, and the screen flashed with the name Zana. I reached for it automatically, thinking it was another "we've discussed everything." But then a text appeared that you don't read aloud. I can't wait until evening. Misha will be late, and the old woman will go to bed around 9. We'll be alone. Put on that perfume, Mark. Elena leaned across the table, squinted over her glasses, and just gave a short grunt. I took a screenshot, took a breath, and wrote a reply, apparently to the wrong recipient. And Zana, I advise you to be more careful with your phone. A second later, the phone rang. Oh my God, Galina, it's a misunderstanding, she blurted out into the receiver. I'll come over now and explain everything. Come over, I said. I'll open the door. She burst in 20 minutes later, flushed and breathing heavily, clearly having run. She stopped in the hallway, her hands clasped in front of her like a student in front of the principal. It turned out funny, she began, her voice trembling. I was texting my friend, it's a joke, you know? Your friend's name is Mark? I asked calmly. Or is it the man from the construction site after all? Zana seemed to deflate. She glanced at the floor, then at me, and it became clear that it was harder for her to hold my gaze than to keep her balance on the rug. It's not what you think, she whispered. Then what is it? I turned down the gas on the kettle so it wouldn't rattle and sat down opposite her. It's betrayal, Zana. In my house, while my son is working hard to pay for your beautiful life. She was silent, then, as if giving up, she exhaled. 8 months. Who is he? Mark Davidov. He has a construction company. Does he have a wife? A pause, a glance to the side, and that was enough. Svetlana, she squeezed out. Just don't tell her, please. I put the phone on the table, screen up, with a screensaver so the conversation wouldn't fly away. Listen here, I said quietly, without raising my voice. Tonight you tell Mikhail everything yourself. Not tomorrow, not sometime later, but today. You write to Svetlana yourself too. And you finish your series immediately. If you don't say anything, I will. And not just to them, but to your mom and your lawyer dad, since they love legal aspects so much. The choice is simple. She looked at me with huge eyes, in which fear flashed quickly, and tried to find some kind of loophole. This will destroy 2 families, you destroyed them, I replied. I'm just going to give them back their names. Jean swallowed, ran her hand over her forehead, glanced at the door, as if trying to decide whether to run or negotiate. I'll tell them, she whispered at last. Just give me some time. You have time, I nodded. Until morning. And Jean, regardless of your confessions, you have 20 days left. Pack your things. It will be easier for everyone. She flinched as if she had been slapped and, without saying goodbye, rushed out into the darkening hallway. The door slammed. And the house was once again filled with the ticking of the clock and the soft rustling of snow on the windowsill. I put the cups in the dryer, wiped the table, and, settling into the armchair by the window, allowed myself to close my eyes for the first time that day, not out of fatigue, but to put my thoughts in order. At a little past 11, tires squealed in the yard, my son's car. A thin strip of light from the hallway cut across the room. A shadow on the wall stopped at my door. A knock, quiet as in childhood. Mom, you're awake. At night, Mikhail stood in the doorway, as if afraid to step inside, sat down in his father's chair and was silent for a long time, staring at the lamp as if it were a bonfire. She told me about Mark, and I finally exhaled. 8 months. I didn't even notice. You didn't have to play detective, I replied quietly. You were my husband. Those are different roles. She's asking for a chance. A psychologist, starting from scratch, promises. He rubbed his face with his hands. And I sit and think, 3 years of my life, and I didn't see anything. You weren't the only one who should have seen it, I said, putting my hand on his shoulder. But it's your decision. Whatever you decide, the deadline remains the same. You have 20 days left. After that, everyone is on their own. He nodded like a man who for the first time agrees not to argue with reality, got up, kissed me on the cheek, and went to his room. And in the house you could hear the clock ticking and the snow rustling on the windowsill again. At exactly 10 o'clock in the morning, 2 people appeared at the door, Raisa, in her impeccable suit, and next to her a man with a leather briefcase and the confident look of someone who has already measured the distance to victory. Roman Kovalev, he introduced himself solemnly. Zana's father. A lawyer. We need to discuss the legal aspects. Come in, I said, and led them into the living room. The folder was already waiting on the table. You know, I believe in the power of paper no less than in the power of a calm voice. The situation is as follows, Roman began, laying out some printouts. Due to their joint management of the household, significant investment of labor and time. And as family members who have lived here for 3 years, Jean and Mikhail have rights that you cannot ignore. Eviction by unilateral decision is illegal. Are you talking about social housing or fairy tales? I asked without a smile, because we don't have a municipal apartment. We have a lease agreement with the owner. The payments went to me, the appointment, the rent. I pushed a thin stack of statements toward him. 3 years, 12 payments a year. And also, a significant investment, at my expense. Checks, invoices, contracts with craftsmen, the customer and the payer, me alone. Roman glanced at them briefly, his eyebrows barely twitching, but his voice remained velvety. Documents are important, no doubt about it. But there are precedents. Where the court takes into account the actual circumstances, improvement of property, housekeeping, family relationships. Family relationships are about respect, I replied calmly. Yesterday, your daughter called me a failure in my own home in front of guests. That's on the subject of relationships. And on the subject of the law, here is the notice of termination of the contract, here is the delivery receipt. The term is 30 days. Today is -1. Raisa snorted. Do you think the court will take your side? I think so. The court will side with the law, I said. And the law is on the side of the owner, who did everything by the book, paid for everything himself, and gave advance notice. Roman realized that a frontal attack wasn't working, put down his papers, got up, and said, We'll come back to this conversation. Come back, I nodded. But keep in mind, the longer you drag it out, the less time your clients will have to prepare. The door closed, and it seemed to get warmer. The air returned to its place, and the house began to breathe evenly again. I put the kettle on and was already reaching for the newspaper when Elena called. I'll be right back, she said briefly, and 5 minutes later we were sitting in the kitchen. She took a thin envelope out of her bag. My cousin in the hospital helped me look at something. Here. Inside the envelope was a copy of a foreign marriage certificate. Zana Kovalova and Mark Davidov, issued 6 months ago in Tbilisi. Next to it were several printouts, changes in accounts, shares in the company, re-registered cars. Svetlana Davidova, Elena said quietly, had filed a report with the police and bailiffs 3 months ago. When her husband began giving away property. It seems they have quite a history there. A chill ran down my spine, not from fear, but from understanding the scale of it all. It wasn't just cheating, and it wasn't just cash in envelopes. It was a scheme, as simple as a rubber glove and just as shameless. Thank you, Len, I said, putting the papers in the same folder where the receipts were. Now it's up to those whose job it is to call these things by their proper names. An hour later, the phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number, and the voice was calm and businesslike. Galina Lazareva? Investigator Morozova, UMVD. We have materials on Davidov and your sister-in-law. We would like to meet with you to obtain documents and explanations. Would you be available today? Yes, we can, I replied. The folder is ready. Good. And then, for the first time, a hint of steel flashed in her voice. Don't be surprised if our people show up at your house this evening. We are monitoring movements. Tomorrow morning there will be procedural actions. We agreed on a time. I hung up the phone and sat for a while, listening to the house, to the barely audible sound of water running through the pipes, to the crackling of a dry board in the kitchen, to the ticking of the clock. Then I got up, took another transparent folder out of the closet, separated everything related to money, the studio, schedules, and other people's geotags, and closed it with a latch. By evening, the sky had lowered, and snow was falling in thick flakes. The streetlights blurred into golden circles. Mikhail came home earlier than usual, put his bag by the door, and, without taking off his coat, asked from the hallway, "Mom, what's going on?" There was an unfamiliar car parked outside the house, and I don't think it belonged to the neighbors. I looked at my watch, at the thick snowy darkness outside the window, and heard a short ring at the gate, once, twice, insistently, like those who came not to ask, but to demand. The ring repeated, short, insistent, and I already knew who it was. At the doorstep, two men in uniform, polite and focused, and next to them, a woman in civilian clothes, introduced herself as Morozova, an investigator. They asked to go into the kitchen. I put the kettle on out of habit. But no one wanted tea. I took out a folder and laid out copies on the table. An extract, a contract, a receipt, screenshots with geotags, a list of phone numbers. I signed the explanations of where, what, and when, and indicated who was who. Mikhail stood in the doorway, pale, listening to every word as if he were learning to pronounce his own life all over again. At night, the house breathed evenly, as if after a long illness, and at dawn, a siren wailed quietly, and two cars drove into the yard. Zana ran out into the hallway barefoot, not shouting, just clinging to the doorframe like a railing on a slippery staircase. Kovalova Zana? Let's go. They put the bracelets on her carefully, without saying a word, let her gather her documents and phone, and then the door slammed shut, followed by the warm air of the hallway being sucked out, like when you open a window in winter. Around the same time, they took Mark away, they reported over the radio. Mikhail returned to the street, took off his hat, sat down on a stool, and stared at one spot for a long time. I put my hand on his shoulder. Sometimes that's enough for a person to sit out their own silence. Then everything went on as usual. Searches, summonses, confrontations, paper after paper. I went to the department as if to work, calmly, without unnecessary emotions, letting everyone do their job. There were many people in the courtroom, it was crowded, the benches warm with emotion. Prosecutor Marina Chen read calmly and in detail. Incidents in several regions, transfers of assets to dummy accounts, a studio for show, cash lessons without declarations, marriage to Mark while still married to Mikhail. Fictitious gift agreements. The victims, 7 families, she said, and someone in the courtroom sighed as if they had just recognized someone else's handwriting on their wall. The amounts were given in rubles, large and unpleasant. Nothing clicked inside me, I just thought, good. That papers have no memory, otherwise they would scream. Svetlana approached us during the break, small, composed, with eyes in which fatigue no longer competed with dignity. She thanked us for the copies and printouts, without which we would have dragged on indefinitely. I nodded. The three of us stood there like people on a platform. Everyone has their own train and their own path, but for a minute you're still together until they announce boarding. Mikhail listened silently, didn't argue, didn't justify anyone, and that was more important than any words. The verdict was announced quickly. Without drama, Zana received a real sentence, general regime, several years, plus a fine. Mark received less, but also unconditional. The lawyers tried to raise a fuss, saying that they had been pressured, misrepresented, and misunderstood. But the judge seemed to have enough papers and dates to not listen to long speeches. When the guards led the defendants to the exit, Zana did not turn around. And thank God, I don't like eyes that at the last moment are looking not for a person, but for a convenient spectator. 3 months later, Mikhail moved into a rented one-room apartment on the other side of town, with white walls, an inexpensive table, and new keys in his pocket. He came in the evenings to help with the garden, fiddled with the faucet, changed light bulbs, did simple things that bring a man back to himself. We talked briefly, to the point, about work, about bills, about where to buy an inexpensive sofa. We talked little about love and why it turned out that way, because if you explain a broken cup out loud every day, it won't become whole again. The house calmed down. I could hear the apple tree branches crackling in the frost, the neighbor's schoolboy throwing a ball against the garage wall at 2 in the afternoon. The kettle boiling in the kitchen, and nothing else breaking the silence. I live at my own pace, pay my bills, check the heaters before the cold weather sets in, and sort through my papers once a month so that nothing unnecessary is lying around. Sometimes I wonder where the line is between gentleness and weakness. The answer is simple and unpleasant. It's when you allow yourself to be humiliated in your own home. The moral here is not complicated. Boundless kindness is not kindness, but convenience for strangers. Boundaries are not cruelty, but caring for yourself and those you love. Over these months, I have once again realized that to defend yourself is sometimes to say no and close the door. And that what happens on the other side of the door is not your fault. My home is mine, my life is mine, and that is enough to wake up peacefully. Mikhail and I see each other as two adults who have reasons to respect each other. He builds his life, I take care of mine. No happy fanfare, no tragedies, just life, in which everyone has their place and their rules. And you know, it may not be a fairy tale, but it's true. Loneliness is not a punishment if there is dignity in it, and a new beginning is not fireworks, but the quiet click of a new lock closing from the inside. Thank you for listening to this story to the end. Write in the comments how old you are and where you are from. It's important for us to know who is watching us. Like and subscribe to the channel. There are even more real-life stories ahead.